Frank Marino is another guitar player who some of you might not be too familiar with. His group, Mahogany Rush, came on the rock scene in the early 70s. He was compared to Jimi Hendrix quite a lot, especially early in his career. And then the stories and rumors started to fly. Some were true, some total nonsense. But either way, it did help further his career and get the band some notoriety. So let's take a look back and see what we can find out about another great rock guitarist you just don't seem to hear much about. He was born Francesco Antonio Marino, November 20th, 1954, in Montreal, Canada. Growing up was a long and winding road for Frank. He started out early playing the drums. He wanted to play like Buddy Rich, but it was at 13 he first picked up a guitar, and after that, he never put it down. I started playing guitar because I was in a hospital, and there weren't any drums there, Frank says. They didn't have drums in the children's ward of hospitals, but there was a guitar in the day room, so I started playing with that. Now, why was Frank in a hospital at such a young age? He went on to say, "What happened with me was, I was a little bit young to be experimenting with drugs. But of course, it was the 60s. I had an older brother and sister and friends, so I was kind of a kid mascot type deal. You see, if you look at the Woodstock movie, you actually see that too. You see that these obvious people in their 20s, they have little kid brothers and stuff with them that looks like they're 8 years old. You know, you see that in the crowd. So I was like one of those guys." So Frank first picked up a guitar while he was in a children's hospital recovering from the effects of LSD trips. After being released from the hospital, Frank says his mother wanted to do whatever she could to keep him from freaking out at home. So she bought him a guitar, since the one he had been playing at the hospital had to stay there. His mother bought him a 1961 SG Les Paul. To try and grasp some sanity from the effects of LSD, a 14-year-old Frank buried himself deep into his guitar playing. His guitar was with him all the time. Whenever he started to lose touch, he would just start playing and was soon to form a band with some friends. In the early years, he played in church and even on a float in a parade. They did mostly cover songs by The Doors, Hendrix, Pink Floyd, Cream, Johnny Winter, and even some of the Grateful Dead, as well as a few originals that Frank had written. Many band members came and went before Frank found the right fit, with drummer Jimmy Ayub and bassist Paul Harwood. That was when the band named Mahogany Rush was really born. The name was something that Frank said just came out of his mind from reliving an acid trip. As his style of playing came along, and he was sometimes praised and sometimes criticized for sounding like Jimi Hendrix. But Frank has stated many times that he did not consciously set out to imitate Hendrix. The whole style just came naturally, he said. "I didn't choose it, it chose me." Now, I tend to believe what he said, because he has also stated that he really didn't practice. He just jammed. So I'm pretty sure he wasn't sitting in front of a record player bouncing the needle back on a Hendrix album, copying riffs off of him. I think Frank just played what he felt inside of him. The music he had heard was an influence, as it is with all players. After a couple years of seeming to get nowhere fast, the band finally recorded the debut album, Maxum. Frank was 17 years old when they first started working on this album. Very mature sounding music for a 17-year-old who had only been playing guitar for around 4 years. His vibrato and stretches were very, very good. His vocals was above and beyond what you would expect out of a kid this young. Mahogany Rush's style of music, I always just called it psychedelic acid rock back then. But you would also hear in Frank's guitar playing some of the sounds of Johnny Winter and Eric Clapton. You would hear a very talented singer and player. And I wouldn't really understand how talented until the summer of 1977, when I had a chance to attend a Mahogany Rush show at an old vaudeville theater in downtown St. Louis. This theater was built for sound. It had been named the Orpheum, and at the time I went, it was called the American Theater. I'm guessing here, but it seated about 1,500 to 2,000 people tops. I sat 5 rows back from the stage. Then one of the hometown DJs who was emceeing the show introduced Mahogany Rush, and to say they exploded on the stage is an understatement. And I couldn't take my eyes off of Marino. The guy's stage presence, vocals, and guitar just had me locked. Steve Marriott had the same effect on me when I saw Humble Pie. Frank Marino's playing was really great live. Tone was rock and roll to the bone. Of course, the rumors were still flying around that he was a reincarnation of Hendrix. And he did have that sort of same sound. He did play a couple of Hendrix songs, along with originals and a version of Johnny B. Good, from what I can remember. I said in an earlier video I missed Rory Gallagher when he came to town, and I'll always regret that. But seeing Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush helped ease that pain. They were one of the better live performances I saw in the 70s. That band was built for performing live. Frank did play the Gibson SG that night, which he was known for. I don't even remember if there was another guitar on stage or if he switched. The amps were acoustic, which I later learned were solid-state amps, but his tone was as big as all outdoors. I've read where some say Frank's tone sucked, and some say it was great. The small-seat auditorium I heard him in, he sounded huge. Now, if any of you out there have more information on Frank and his gear, feel free to leave it in the comments section. Mahogany Rush would go on and keep recording and touring through the 70s. They would play the Cal Jam 2 at the Ontario Motor Speedway to 300,000 people. They would end their show with Purple Haze, followed by a quick rendition of the Mickey Mouse Club theme song. If you haven't watched this, I'll leave a link in the video description for you to check out. And if you were actually there, I'm sure people would like to hear your accounts of Frank and Mahogany Rush that night. If you listen to him play Purple Haze, yes, you can hear Frank Marino could sound pretty much like Hendrix. But not all of his playing did. Hendrix was a style and sound of music that Frank Marino cut his teeth on. So sure, when he played a Hendrix song, it did sound pretty close. And of course, the press took that and ran with it. I think some of these comparisons bothered Frank. Here's how he felt about it. Some of those stories they wrote were all bullshit, he said. He goes on to say, it's not reincarnation or the spirit of Hendrix, or he died and came back to life, and I'm like, dude, I was in the hospital in September of 1968, and Hendrix died in September of 70. I got out of the hospital by January or February 1969, but I mean, still, another 2 years before he died, I was playing guitar. I even had a band called Mahogany Rush before he died. Probably the most talked about story is that he took an overdose and woke up from a coma in the hospital and somehow became the spirit of Hendrix, or that he met this spirit and it entered him, giving him the amazing ability to play guitar and magically know everything about it. It was more all insane than an acid trip. The reporters didn't want the truth. They just wanted to make things up and get their stories read. And naturally, we all read them, myself included. It was good publicity for Frank and it did help, but later on, as I said, it bothered him. Even though he admits it did help his career by saying, look, without Hendrix, I wouldn't have had the career I had because all the people kept talking about me. And that's probably why the record company signed me. But still, I would have done the same kind of music anyway. I might have done it differently, but I still would have done it. I still would have done psychedelic music, and obviously, it must have been honest because I didn't really make a lot out of it. And all I got was grief, and yet I'm still doing it, 50 years later. I haven't changed. If it was a gimmick, you'd think I would have changed 40 years ago when it wasn't working. It's not like I ever sold millions of records and was a huge success with it. As the 70s passed and the 80s rolled in, changes in the band were inevitable. First, they brought in Frank's brother Vince to play guitar. Drummer Jimmy would leave the band in 1982, and then bass player Paul Harwood a few years after that, both being replaced, and Frank kept on playing and recording. The guitar was an extension of Frank Marino's soul, and if you listen to his music, especially his live stuff, you can really feel what he was wanting to say. He was way more than just a Jimi Hendrix clone. All you have to do is listen. Frank Marino would retire from doing live performances a few years ago. He started having issues with movement in his shoulder and it freezing up. The medical term is adhesive capsulitis. I know someone who plays guitar with the same problem. He's even had surgery to try and stop the freezing up and get movement back. Did it help? Yeah, a little, but no doctor or surgery can halt Father Time. Frank, without a doubt, was one of the great live performers of the 70s psychedelic rock era. His music was definitely acid-infused early on. Even his first 3 album covers were, as Frank put it, pictures going on in my mind at that time. Take a look at a few closely. He has a website, mahoganyrush.com, where you can find his music and merch, so stop by and check it out. I'll leave you with a few more videos here that I think you might enjoy that's on the channel. Check them out before you leave. And as always, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video. And subscribe on your way out. And thanks so much for watching.